Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Startup Vagabond. If you clicked on the thumbnail, you probably know what we're going to be talking about today. This book, The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. Little background, if you don't know anything about Ray Dalio, one of the most successful investors alive today, him and Warren Buffett, they're definitely on the Mount Rushmore of living investors. He ran, or still is a part of, Bridgewater Investments. And they're the most successful and the largest hedge fund in the world for quite a long time. But really great story. If you want to look more into him, continue here on YouTube and look into his backstory. He's really big, like history buff, and great at kind of learning from his mistakes, which is his main point that he kind of always goes back to in his other books. He started investing in the 70s, and then Nixon came out and said we're going off the gold standard, and he thought it was going to tank the economy, so he bet against it. And then the next day, the economy rose by 25%, and he lost all his money. So he took that, and he talks about it in this book as well. He took that lesson, and he decided to go do a really deep dive on the history of these markets and these changes. And he saw that back in the 30s, it happened again with Eisenhower in charge, who said, hey, we're going to take it off the gold standard for a little while and just start printing money, which also led to an increase in the stock market. So really good at learning from history. This book specifically is all about the last 500-600 years of history. He does a real deep dive on really what, the changing world order of like what makes a country or a superpower rise and fall. And he has it in a pretty streamlined, like 250-year time period of like 18 steps. I'll go through them in just a second, like 18 different steps from, the country starting or like unifying to whenever it ultimately collapses and like passes on to another one. Most of the time it happens in a time of like conflict, like whenever the British switched over from them being the leading superpower to the Americans. It was about World War II time whenever we switched. So we weren't fighting each other, but usually it's a war that is the final nail in the coffin that bankrupts a superpower and forces them to lower their status. Sometimes one of the other things that leads to that is the reserve currency of like what other countries are trading in, what's the most trusted currency. And right now the US dollar is still the reserve currency. It's been losing, the overall percentage of what's being used for reserve status, but it's still up there right now, and we'll talk about that later. But I wanted to kind of start off with going through the kind of 18 steps. He calls this the big cycle, is the 18 steps to go from a rising power to reaching your peak to a falling power. And we'll go through these real quick. Usually at the very beginning, you've got, strong leadership, inventiveness, investment in education, strong culture, good resource allocation, good competitiveness, strong income growth, strong markets and financial centers. And then you get to kind of that top. Like that's the growing, the first 100 years. It's just everything's feeling great. You got the roaring 20s. You got the 40s, 50s, 60s when the economy is just booming in the U.S. Then you hit the top and things become less productive. The country becomes overextended. You lose your competitiveness. There's wealth gaps. So this is more that 70s, 80s, 90s in the U.S. And then the decline, which starts with larger debts, excessive money printing, internal conflicts, loss of reserve currency, weak leadership, civil war and revolution. So luckily we haven't, we had a civil war already in the US. Hopefully we don't have another one. But you can see kind of like the pattern keeps repeating itself over and over. If you study these other empires and countries, he starts off with kind of the end of the Habsburg in Spain, and which is their decline, but it leads to the rise of the Dutch. It starts off with things like the Dutch East India Trading Company and how they built the first stock market, and people could invest in it, and the country is becoming wealthier and more inventive. And like 25% of all inventions, from the new boats to the new ways of navigation to new like engines and things like that, were starting to come out of the Dutch for quite a while. While they were having their like rise portion. Then they reached the top, And then every single time that another country reaches their top or starts declining, another one starts rising to take its place. And the British started rising. Then they had their period and they started declining. Then the US started rising in World War II. Now we're kind of in our kind of later stage, that decline. And the argument that he makes in this book is that right now, at the very end of the book, is right now, the US is in its decline and China is in its incline, its rise. But this book was written, I believe it came out in 2021. So right as COVID's coming out, right as COVID's ending, which I will say a lot has happened since then, and a lot of changes have been happening in China. So I can't really, in all honesty, argue that America's, not still in decline. I think the only guarantee for every empire that's ever existed is that one day it will fall. No empire lasts forever. Ask the Romans. But I will say I slightly disagree on the China rising and taking over as the next superpower in the world. With all the internal conflict and everything else that's happening in China right now. In fact, I'm going to make a separate video about that, of why I don't think China will take over as the next superpower. But I also don't have an answer as to who will. So who knows? Maybe we'll have a period of just nobody being a clear superpower or clear leader in the world for a while. Maybe it'll be very similar to what people felt like in the 60s, 70s during the Cold War, whenever it felt like the US and the Soviets were on neck and neck. But then we found out later the Soviets were actually hemorrhaging money, and it's a different topic. But that's where the book kind of talks about. If you like history, if you like international economics, this is a great book. It goes really in depth. It's over 500 pages of great info. Honestly, it's a whole semester's worth of coursework in one book. So highly recommend if you like those topics. But what does this mean for startup founders? The three main points that I kind of pulled out of this was: 1, no empire lasts forever; 2, keep an eye on those long-term debt cycles; and 3, kind of that big question of who will be the next superpower. And if I had to put some money on it right now, I'd probably say I think we might just be without a clear winner for a while. And I think specifically when it comes to startups, I think the investment, I think where they're at, I think where startups are going to be coming from is going to be more evenly spread out around the world. We're starting to see more and more of these ecosystems around Japan and Europe and Africa and South America and Central America and the rest of Asia, all just exploding right now. So I think we're going to see a lot more competition in these deep tech, ag tech, AI spaces, and different people with their different cultures and different ways of life are going to be bringing those to the table and making these different startups and competing with each other in very unique ways. So I'm very excited to see that, and how a Japanese founder versus a US founder versus a Spanish founder versus a Brazilian founder all solve the same problem in 4 or 5 different ways. So very excited to see that. Key takeaways: keep an eye on what's happening around the world. Keep an eye on what's happening in the US. Keep an eye on the value of the US dollar, the yen, the RMB, the whatever your currency is. I don't know. I'm not going to be giving you investing advice, but maybe Bitcoin wouldn't be such a bad idea right now. It's kind of a hedge against inflation, or a hedge against the devaluation or inflation of your currency. So I don't know. Keep an eye on all of that. And right now things are so in flux politically. I would say it's a very bad time to be a startup founder, depending on government funding, government grants, government programs, especially if you're in deep tech, more university focused. Man, it's going to be an uphill battle for the next few years against the current Trump administration. So who knows? Every problem is just an opportunity in disguise for a good founder. So who knows what you're going to find? Maybe you need to, look at different styles of investment. Maybe you need to look at investment from different countries. Maybe moving to a different country would be a good game plan for you right now. I don't know, but keep an eye on those things. If you have any questions or comments or you disagree, please leave it down in the comment section, and I will get back to you. But that's the biggest thing is, man, when you look at the last 500-600 years of history all condensed into one book, it really puts it into, it makes it simple that history doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme pretty well. So keep an eye on history, learn from the past, and keep an eye on your startup and what problems might be ahead. Think on not just your individual market, but on a countrywide scale of, what competition is going to be coming out of somewhere else, or where, there are certain places where certain industries are more appreciated or easily funded. You can see that with AI. It's incredibly difficult to build anything AI focused in Europe right now, but it's a lot easier to go to Silicon Valley and build it there, or Japan or Brazil to build AI products. So keep an eye on regulation. Make sure that your own country isn't out-regulating your own startup, and ending you before you start. But that's all I got for today. Questions, comments, concerns. If you just disagree with me, if you think this was all wrong, let me know. And we'll talk again soon. I'm excited for June to put out. We have 4 different interviews lined up for next week. So I'm super excited. We're going all the way from Greece, Italy. We got one here in the US, and one more I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But we have quite a few already lined up for next month. So I'm super excited to be talking to these founders and investors from around the world. So until next time, see you later. Bye.